At WFM Labs, our organization recognizes the importance of gaining market insights to compete effectively and provide better goods and services to our customers. However, exchanging price or commercially sensitive information with competitors can violate antitrust laws and harm competition. To avoid antitrust risk, it is essential to ensure that information exchanges in the WFM Labs community are reasonable and promote competition. This includes avoiding discussions or coordination of sensitive topics such as customer prices, pricing paid to vendors, compensation paid to employees, or proprietary information. If you would like more information, please refer to the guidelines outlined by the FTC and DOJ, Antitrust Guidelines for Collaborations Among Competitors. In addition, WFM Labs meetings are being recorded. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to be recorded. And finally, we ask that all participants review and comply with our code of conduct. Thank you.
Hi, it's Ted Lango with WFM Labs. Thank you for joining our session on microbreaks. Today we're going to go through what are microbreaks. I'm going to share some of the science behind why I believe we should all be leveraging microbreaks, and then touch briefly on simulating the benefits of microbreaks. The call is being recorded. At the end, I'll end up stopping the recording. If anyone wants to stay on, ask any questions, has any feedback, welcome that as well. So let's jump in. I view microbreaks as over here on the far right side of the equation. We've been talking a lot about the next generation of workforce management, level 5, being employee first, AI readied. At WFM Labs, we're really taking a focus this year in 2024 to be focused a lot more on the people side of workforce management. Last year, we talked a lot about simulation, about automation, about some pretty technical stuff. This year, we're going to hone in on level 5 and really what it means to be employee first and AI ready. Today's subject is right in that sweet spot. Microbreaks, while a level 5 type thing, I think are best enabled with real-time automation. We'll talk a little bit about the difference of how real-time automation can come into play here and really make microbreaks fairly powerful. So let's just start. What are microbreaks? At the simplest level, microbreaks are short, frequent breaks at work. There's nothing terribly radical about that definition. We've thought about breaks at work in different ways, though, over the years, and there was a big focus on the physical side of breaks at work. Cornell University Ergonomics Web. I think we've all been taught this over the years that, hey, if you're sitting in a job, you shouldn't be sitting straight through. You should break up your day and ensure that at least 2 hours of that is standing, a half hour is moving, every 30 minutes making those moves. Stanford University, through their environmental health and safety organization, broke it down further and said that you should break up those repetitive or static postures by taking micro breaks. It's the first area that I saw that term micro break, but it was still tied to the physical nature of things. If you're basically working at a keyboard or static posture some way, you should move physically. And while we all recognize the importance of our physical health and micro breaks maintaining, our body health and preventing strain, we need to think about our most vital organ, our brain. Just as our muscles need a break, our skeleton needs to move, our brain and the cognitive processes always also need a rest now and then. So mental breaks, they're essential for cognitive restoration. There's a lot of different types of mental breaks. I pulled out these 3: reflective breaks, short periods of mindfulness or meditation to clear the mental clutter; stimulative breaks, engaging in a different type of cognitive activity like a puzzle or a creative task to basically activate different areas of your brain. And then we all need rest, whether it's sleeping at night well or just stepping away from your work-related thoughts. These can really help in terms of a cognitive restoration. Before I jump into the science, though, I want to touch on how contact centers and other office work is pretty different in my mind. Contact center work versus traditional office, I think, is important to look at this dimension when we start thinking about breaks. And in traditional office work, micro breaks are something that could happen anytime. If somebody just walked over and gave you a cup of coffee, hey, you've taken a break. But in contact centers, we know that breaks have traditionally been fixed and scheduled. There is no one walking over generally and giving you a cup of coffee. You're not standing up and walking over and grabbing a cup of water. You're expected to be there until your break comes up. And when I thought about these and thought about the words that sort of describe these two environments, they're very different types of worlds themselves. Micro breaks, if you're not in a contact center and you have a regular office job, micro breaks can be autonomous, self-paced, flexible, informal, unbound, discretionary, spontaneous. These are all positive types of terms and words. When we think about call center breaks and the traditional way that they're fixed and scheduled, they're scheduled, monitored, regulated, restricted, stringent, controlled, have to adhere to your schedule. So I think they're very two different, very in different environments, and breaks themselves are looked at, I'd say almost like hey, this is something that can positive, happen anytime, or very restricted in the contact center space. Now, what was interesting to kind of dive into the science is we all got a taste, I think, on the pandemic of what it's like to be on the phone on back-to-back-to-back calls. For many people during the pandemic, we had back-to-back video meetings. One conversation would end, another one would begin. Often there was no chance to stretch, pour a glass of water, or just clear your head. You'd be on one video call after another. I know a lot of people who still experience this. And it was this particular phenomena that led to this research that I found fascinating that Microsoft's Human Lab did, where they essentially used EEG caps to measure beta wave activity associated with stress in the brains of these participants. They had 14 volunteers who each participated in 2 different sessions of meetings. One day they attended stretches for 4 1/2-hour sets of meetings that were back to back. Each call was devoted to a different task, like designing an office layout or creating a marketing plan. And on another day, the 4 1/2-hour meetings were interspersed with 10-minute breaks. Instead of just coming off of one video call and on to the next call, or going from one meeting to the next, participants meditated with the Headspace app during those breaks. And there are 3 big findings that came out of this. When participants were given a chance to meditate, the beta activity associated with those folks dropped, allowing them to reset. This reset means that they started their next meeting in a more relaxed state. That also led to brainwave patterns that showed this positive level of frontal alpha asymmetry, which is way up beyond my brain, but correlates to higher engagement itself during the next meeting. On the contrary side of this is the participants who were deprived of these breaks. Researchers noticed that the transition between the periods of calls led to these high spikes in stress levels themselves. As a result, it took away from number 2. They weren't engaged as much. So this notion of back-to-back meetings really went out and proved that your brain needs breaks. And it's a study that you can Google. Got me to thinking, it's like, this study really is a great analogy for what happens every day in call centers, whether it's back-to-back-to-back video calls or back-to-back phone calls with customers. I imagine the same type of thing happens in call center agents. I think the business case for micro breaks themselves in the contact center is even stronger than micro breaks for people who are on back-to-back video calls. They still have a sense of freedom and can kind of interject those, where in many contact center environments, that just isn't open to them. So let's just pivot briefly about how micro breaks might work in contact centers and the dynamics around it. We know, if we've worked in contact centers, that in a healthy service level environment, and depending on what your service level goal and how big the team is, when you're hitting service level, there's the natural breaks that happen as part of occupancy to ensure that you're ready, for the next call. In small queues or groups with higher service level, these breaks can be significant. They can add up as high as, I've modeled out groups that have as high as 50 minutes of idle time in between when they're hitting service level. That can go down as well when you're working in large pools and you've got lower service level targets, then those breaks get shorter. But the point is you still end up with anywhere on the low side from 10 to 50 minutes of natural rest that's interjected. But when we're not hitting service level, what happens? If we've worked in call centers, we know that effectively that short staffing, that period of time where we're not hitting leads to really back-to-back calls. And at the end of the day, it's those intervals between that go away. What happens as well is we see a rise in handle time. By the end of the day, the agents have had less than a minute of break other than their pre-scheduled breaks. They've had no rest time in between calls. I've modeled this out. A number of others have modeled this out over the years where the higher our occupancy, AHT goes up as well. The agents, even though they're not being afforded those breaks in between calls, they're still building it in to the AHT of the call itself. But ultimately, even when they build in that AHT, that still is leading to burnout. I believe that this is one of the highest drivers of turnover in contact center is when we get into these long periods of time where we just have back-to-back-to-back calls. So I advocate for micro breaks, and the third part that I'm going to touch on, we're not going to go too deep into it, is you can run simulations on micro breaks themselves. You may get immediate pushback that says, hey, Ted, if we start introducing, a 60-second micro break every time there's 3 or 4 or 5 back-to-back calls, that's going to take away from our ability to hit service level. It's going to make service level even worse. And I've run through with this tool called Wurzenschlanger Simulator. It's a German tool. Simulations where you can see the results of introducing micro breaks, and some of the findings are pretty amazing at how little of an AHT change it takes to justify introducing micro breaks. I use this simulator to run through scenarios where I took a pool of 40 agents and I took a second pool of 175 agents. I wanted to model both a small call center group and a moderate size call center group. And in each of these call center groups, I did the same thing where I said, hey, group 100 and 300, they're not going to have any breaks. They're going to be dealing with the back-to-back calls. And the second group are going to have micro breaks that are injected into their schedules. A 60-second micro break, I've modeled it different ways that trade off with the handle time. And essentially, group 1 with no micro breaks, we modeled these at 325 second calls, and group 2, we modeled at 319 seconds. And what this tool allows you to do is to really examine how does calls and queue perform over the day? What does wait time look like as micro breaks are injected in one group and taken out of another group, with the handle time trade-off itself. The simulator allows you to put in your own numbers. You may be able to study and say, hey, in good service level times, our handle time is 20 seconds lower, or it's 10 seconds lower. You can model these numbers in and take a group against another group. And what really surprised me on the outcome of the findings themselves was the queues and the average speed of answer. The break even is pretty low. In terms of how many seconds you have to shave off to really still hit your handle times or your average speed of answers that you wish to hit. Ultimately, the big find for me here is the far larger impact on average speed of answer when you injected those breaks was whether or not you were working with a small pool of agents or a large pool of agents. The ASA in large pools, we all know, goes down significantly. So this, to me, I've played with a number of these models, and while every environment's different and you've got to inject your own assumptions around how much handle time you'll save, ultimately, the savings on handle time can easily justify introducing short micro breaks when times are running back-to-back-to-back calls. One final word on this is these micro breaks themselves can be turned on with your ACD a lot of times, where there's just an automatic break that's put in after every call. Some call centers will do that. They'll just introduce it. I've never done it personally because I've found it to be wasteful in certain call centers. However, that's where automation comes into play. Automation can separate out the times where micro breaks may not be needed because service level is healthy and people are getting the appropriate downtime. But automation can also be leveraged to uncover when people are on back-to-back-to-back calls, and really when it pays off to inject a 60-second micro break, even when service level may be suffering because of the impact both on the employee and their ability to be ready for that next call, as well as handle time itself. If you'd like to model any of these things, I've shared that particular Microsoft or Microbreaks simulator. It's not a Microsoft product. It's a Microbreaks simulator in our bronze tier on WFM Labs. To get into the bronze tier and take advantage of the research that we're adding, the training that we're building, and some of these tools is easy. You just need to invite 2 friends to WFM Labs or share 2 pieces of content that you feel are valuable itself. That'll allow you to get access to the Microbreaks simulator. And by all means, I'm open to discussing this more with anybody who's interested in building some simulations and testing it out. The simulator itself, if you want to test where your break even is a little bit of a learning curve, but I was able to work with this simulator pretty quickly, and I'm happy to teach anyone else how to model some of those things out. So that's in WFM Labs on our community site under calculators and tools, a new simulation tool that we have shared with the team. Just kind of a final thought on this here is that I was reading some posts in Reddit. This one jumped out at me here. The first one up here, where an individual was reading a mediation board report, so it's a union shop, yesterday, about another union that represents call center workers. There was a I bleeped that out moment. In the current round of negotiation, the workers have on the table micro breaks. I thought this was interesting. They're defined as 40-second breaks between calls in order for operators to clear their head before the next one comes in. I'd bet a month's salary that it won't pass at least this round, but I admire the big blank energy to request it. The final statement here also popped out at me. Even if they get 10 to 20 seconds, it'd be a good beachhead. Now, that's a term that's used in warfare. And that's really what we still see in a lot of contact centers, is an us versus them type thing. And honestly, that's one of our missions at WFM Labs, is to start to look at a people first model, new ways of doing workforce management, where we're really partners with frontline agents, not at war with frontline agents. I thought that was an interesting comment. A lot of people still out there, whether it's a union shop or not, still view it as an us versus them type thing. We're going to be talking about the human side of things quite a bit this year in WFM Labs. I'm going to be doing some presentations on the human side of AI. If you're with us at Intradiem, Intradiem's Forefront Executive Council next week, I'll be speaking to it there. If you're not, we'll also be presenting the concept of the human side of AI and automation through a Society of Workforce Planning Professional webinar on February 22nd. And if you're attending the SWPP conference in March in Nashville, we'll also, at Intradiem, I'll also be touching on this human side of AI. So I encourage folks to join us on those conversations. We're under a fairly big change with AI coming at us. It's a whole new era. And I'll be discussing the significant transformation that we're witnessing with AI and how it's rapidly coming into the workplace. As we enter this new era, we really need to emphasize not just the power behind AI, but the risks, and not just take a look at AI and the technical power and risks, but also look at the human side of AI and how we're going to need to rethink these practices around next generation workforce management processes. One other thing I wanted to highlight too, we're going to be having a conversation with Dan Smithley, a balanced approach to WFM on Tuesday, February 20th. That's a WFM Labs presentation. Jim Simmons will be emceeing it. Irina Mativa and myself and Jim will also act as a panel to bounce things off of Dan. So we welcome you to join us on that meeting as well. So that's Microbreaks. I hope you found this useful. I'll post the material, the research, along with the video out on our YouTube channel if you'd like to review any of it. We look forward to seeing you in additional meetings in the future, joining our community if you're not already a member. And with that, I'll stop the recording.